Okay, everybody, it's 5 o'clock. I'd like to start on time. Tom Schweich, State Auditor. First of all, I want to thank Mayor Hunter for letting me sit in his seat for this audit delivery. I don't know that I had the honor of sitting in a mayor's seat before when I deliver the audit, but it seems like the most convenient way to do it. What I thought I would do is introduce the audit staff that worked on the audit. We have Donna Christian, who's one of our audit managers out of Springfield, who worked on the audit. I'm State Auditor Tom Schweich. Our communications person, Spence Jackson, is over here taking some video for our office. And we also have Candy Copley's here also. There, Candy, who was the auditor in charge of this. So we have our team here from the State Auditor's Office. What I do normally is, in a situation like this, is I'll provide a little bit of background on the audit and how we came to be here and how we organized the audit. And then what I'll do is I will go through each audit finding one by one. And let you know what we found, and then I'll open it up for a few questions of general interest. If you have questions that would be of interest to the group, also questions from the media are fine. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming. It's very important to the State Auditor's Office that people care about their communities, and the people that come to these public deliveries are the people that care about their communities. And I'm very appreciative that you're taking the time to come here today. It means a lot to us. Our audits, my approach to an audit is it's intended to be entirely constructive in nature. We want to help communities improve themselves. We're not interested in hurting anybody or causing any pain or anguish to anybody. What we want to do is we come into a community and we try to help make recommendations for improving the financial condition of that community. In this particular case, this is a petition audit, as you all know. Do we have any of the petitioners here in the audience who actually signed the petition? Yeah. The petition audit is the most important audit I do. I audit every state agency, board, commission, elected official, school district, you name it, I audit it. But a relatively small percentage of the audits we do are audits that are by petition. That means voters have taken the time to get signatures and send them to our office and get them certified, and we come in and do an audit. And our auditors can tell you, I put petition audits at the top of the list. I have literally hundreds of audits I have to do. But when you take the time to get the signatures, I put it at the top of the list and we do that audit first. It might have taken longer than you would have liked, but it got to the top of the line because we really appreciate it when citizens take the time to tell our office that we need people to take a look at the situation. In this particular case, you needed 166 signatures to get us to come in. It's 25% of the registered voters of 662 voters in order to get a state audit. You got 173 valid signatures, and that activates my duty to come in and do an audit. Our audit period was from June 2010 to June 2012. We usually pick a very finite audit period so we can focus on those issues. But if issues came up after that time period, we will take a look at those sometimes too. So some of the issues will go on into the period that follows June 2012. We spent about 500 hours doing this audit. We said the estimate cost of the cost for doing the audit would be up to $40,000. The actual cost is $25,000 or $26,000. That's a lot of money, but I do think that if the recommendations of the auditor are implemented, you will realize savings of much more than that over time. And so it will have been a worthwhile exercise. I put an audit grading system in when I became state auditor 2 years ago. I was elected and I came in and I said, do the entities we audit get a rating? And the answer was no, and I think it's important to give a rating for the simple reason that that prevents other people from mischaracterizing the audit. We like to put the rating on. Any of you teachers out there in the audience, well, you know that people do better when they're going to get graded, and so that's the way we did it. And our grading system is very simple. It's published and it's very objective. It's an excellent, good, a fair report, and you can see exactly what it takes to get one of those ratings. In this particular case, we rated the performance of the city fair, which is, not the highest rating we have, but we also look at what people do when they get the audit and what their reaction is. we found that Mayor Hunter was extremely responsive to our audit and have agreed to implement virtually every recommendation we have on audit. So the news is that it's not a high rating, it's a fair rating. There's some problems. Fair rating usually means there's a lot of little problems and no really big problem. And that's pretty much how I would characterize this audit. And we were very, I go to a lot of cities, I go all over the state, and I can say the administration of this city was very responsive, receptive. They recognized the accuracy of the findings we had, and they've agreed to implement those findings. So we're very pleased with the cooperation we had from the people that run this city. You should be happy about that. Sometimes people get very obstreperous with us. They get very obstructive with our audits. They don't want us here. That was not the case. They recognize that we're here because we're required to be here, because you all signed a petition to have us here, and they've agreed to implement the recommendations that we made. So without further ado, I'm going to run quickly through it. I'm not going to cover it word for word. You all have copies of the audit. You can read it. But I wanted to give you, in person, an overview of what we found. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. I'll talk for about 15 or 20 minutes and then open the floor up for questions. First finding we had was there was a problem with the city no longer allocating part of the sales tax revenue to parks and recreation, which was originally required by the voters. As you all know, in 2003, voters approved a 1/2 cent general sales tax, and 1/8 of that total amount was supposed to go to parks and recreation. There was actually, I think, an error in the way it was stated initially. It was revised, and it was originally 1/8 to 1% instead of 1/8%. But the ordinance was amended, and there was supposed to be a certain percentage that went to the general fund. And what happened was that money eventually was not provided to the general fund in violation of the way the voters approved it. So we had an issue with that, and we believe, the city believed that it was allowed, since the original ordinance only earmarked a portion of the revenue for parks and recreation, but didn't specifically restrict the funds. But our reading of what you voted for was it was required to put that percentage to the parks, and it was not done so. So we've asked that situation be corrected, and I'll talk a little bit in a minute about what's going to happen there. We also found that there was a problem with a tax-exempt lease that a city employee had with respect to a cotton machine, $11,000. That was not appropriate either. There was no documentation indicating the board had approved that obligation, and no one even knew about the issue until the Internal Revenue Service pointed out that there was a tax-exempt obligation outstanding. Our recommendations on these two issues is to calculate the revenues and transfer to the general fund the amount that should have gone from the general fund to Parks and Recreation, the amount that should have gone there to begin with. The board, I understand, has passed a resolution that will allocate the 1/8% to the Parks and Recreation Fund. So I think they've recognized that the voters' intent was not realized, and that situation will be corrected. We think that's important because that was a legal issue. Also, we're going to have future financial obligations in the city's name be approved by the board, and they're going to correct the situation with the copier. So those were two problems we found right off the bat in the audit. We found some problems with disbursement procedures. The board does need to improve procedures for approving, documenting, and allocating expenses to city funds, and also for soliciting bids. One of the most common findings we have in audits is that there's not appropriate competition when the city buys things, and we found some problems in that area. In this particular case, we found some disbursements were not properly approved or supported by adequate documentation. We're talking about $736. It's not big money, but it was not handled properly. And that the monthly list of disbursements approved by the board could not be located from November 2010 to March 2011, and also in June 2011. So it's important to maintain records of these things, be able to show them to the auditors when they come in. Record keeping is important because without adequate records, we can't determine if laws are being followed and procedures are being properly handled. We also found there was no documentation to support allocation of expenses among funds. So you have two maintenance employees, and their salaries are allocated entirely to the water and sewer fund, but they also perform street repair duties, so part of their salary should be allocated to street repair duties. The city collector's main duty is to account for water and sewer monies, but her entire salary is paid from the general fund. Basically, when you have city employees who work on different projects, their salaries need to be allocated to proper projects, and that wasn't happening here. And that's one of the findings of our audit, and I think that problem is also going to be corrected. Procurement is very important. The city did not always comply with your own city code for advertising for bids for services costing more than $5,000. You have a city code that says something's going to cost $5,000 or more, it has to be advertising it. The purpose is simple, it's competition. You're going to get better prices if multiple people have an opportunity to bid on contracts. And we think think that's very important. It's probably one of the most common findings in the audits we have. In this particular case, there were 2 patrol cars purchased for $25,000 that were not procured in conformance with the city ordinance. There was not advertising. And there was also a problem for mowing services, about $8,400, which were also not, those contracts were not let out in accordance with the city ordinance. Engineering services. I know this was a big issue about the sewer construction project that went on in the city. And we found that in April 2011, there was an agreement signed with it was supposed to cost $55,000, but when they added up the change orders, it was about $115,000. That's big money in any city. That's a big expenditure. And in that particular case, we think there should have been better evaluation and selection criteria. When you're going to let out a contract that's that big, you ought to have exactly what the criteria are, how you're going to select it, how you're going to take the bids. And we found that the evaluation and selection criteria for that contract were inadequate. And we hope that in the future, a situation like that will be corrected. Our recommendations are simple. They always flow from the findings. The city needs to maintain documentations for all disbursements, complete and retain the list of approved disbursements. And I understand that has been done now, and our auditors are comfortable in the future going forward. We hopefully will not have that problem again. Ensure that city expenses are properly allocated depending on what job the city employees are doing. And there's going to be a time allocation survey, so they're going to study what the people actually work on, and they're going to allocate their expenditures or their salaries to those projects properly. So I am confident that this problem is going to be fixed. There seems to be a real effort to do so, and they're actually going to study the time and make sure the allocations are proper. And then most important in this particular finding is to ensure bids are solicited in accordance with city code, which was not happening. And my understanding is there's going to be proper procedural requirements put in place and clear documentation when the city buys things, so there's going to be a good trail to show there was adequate competition and adequate evaluation criteria for engineering services. And we're confident that these problems will be corrected. But they were problems. These are not big problems, but they are cumulative problems, a bunch of problems that we think are going to be fixed. Our third finding, if you look in the audit, relates to the finding number 3 you'll see is accounting controls and procedures. We do think the accounting controls and procedures of the city need improvement. The board does not have adequate segregation of duties or supervisory review over the city collector's duties. One of the main things that we look for as auditors is segregation of duties. So if money is coming in, if you have the same person bringing in the money, same person depositing the money, same person reviewing the bank statements, there's all kinds of opportunities for mischief because no one else gets to look at what's going on. The good news is we did not find any evidence of theft, fraud, or criminality. The bad news is I've done how many audits since I've been auditor, 15 or more, where we did find when there was no segregation of duties, people were doing things they shouldn't have done. You've got honest people working here for you, but in order to pass an audit, you cannot have one person looking at everything. There has to be, if there's not enough money in the city to hire a second person to look over things, there ought to be a supervisor that comes in and looks at the books. You might have seen that in Ronald Reagan's hometown of Dixon, Illinois last year, you know that, since it's a small town, the city collector embezzled over 20 years, $51 million. And the reason was because she was the only one bringing in the money, depositing the money, reconciling, and she was siphoning off 1/3 of the money to her own bank account every year. It's the largest case of municipal embezzlement in the history of the country. You don't have that problem here. You got honest people, but you can see why it is we want to make sure that somebody is segregating duties. You cannot pass an audit when only one person handles all the financial transactions. So we pointed this out. The city collector receives, records, and deposits all monies, tracks all utility and property tax accounts, posts adjustments, but no one compares receipts and deposits or reviews the adjustments made in the accounts. That's a lot of work, by the way. We should congratulate the person that has to do all that. It's hard to do all those things. And you have an honest person doing it. But in order to be proper from an audit perspective, there has to be supervisory review. And that's one of our findings here. There were also some problems with receipt slips. People pay taxes or they want a receipt. There were a number of irregularities with the way receipts were given. It wasn't anything systematic. It wasn't anything intentional. It was just a little bit on the sloppy side. The receipts weren't always issued for payments made by checks. They don't always correctly document the method of payment. Was it cash, check, money order, whatever? And they weren't always deposited or timely into the proper city bank account. These are not major problems, but they're the kind of things auditors look at, and we like to see a clean process for receipting because the receipts create the audit trail so we can make sure people are being honest and competent with their money. The recording procedures were also problematic. There was some delay in recording into the computer, putting in the computer system of the city. There were some issues there. And there were also some issues with the backdating of some documentation. Not serious problems, but again, we want the books to be really clean, and we think there should be some procedures that can be improved. One thing you did have that I've never seen before, I have to say, is 9 different bank accounts. For a city of, what was that, 900 people, right? So that's one bank account for every 100 people. We don't normally see that. And we think that's probably as a result of a series of cumulative activities, and no one really bothered to think, can we streamline that? We found, of course, when you have 9 accounts, there's going to be some deposits made in the wrong account, and there were some made in the wrong account. Plus, you're paying $1,800 a month to have this all reconciled by your accountant. And I suspect you wouldn't have to pay as much money if there weren't so many bank accounts. This is something I actually haven't seen before. So we recommended that be streamlined, and that the accounts be reduced, and that the processes be made more simple. That's going to happen. We obviously recommended adequate segregation of duties, and I think some have been segregated now. There's been a review of manual receipt slips and deposit records. That's going on right now. Proper receiving and depositing procedures are now in the process of being put into place. Also, there's no delay. Things are done daily instead of waiting. I said some were late. They're being done on a daily basis now. And there's some discussion now about how to work to reduce the number of bank accounts that the city has, because it appeared to us to be a little on the excessive side. And I think that's going to happen too. So we're happy about that. Let's talk about utilities. I know that's an issue for some of the people who signed the petition. The city did not adequately review operation costs before raising city rates. And the city water loss is huge. It's 49%. Yeah. Generally, you expect some water loss, leakage, and sometimes people steal water too. We don't really have a problem with it when it's in the 10% range. We don't write it up, but this is 49%. And it is the highest water loss rate I've seen since I've been auditing the cities I've audited. We've seen 10, 20, 30%. I've not seen 49%. Almost half the water is being paid for. So we think that's a pretty significant problem. And it's funny because when we were driving in here, we couldn't get by one of the streets because there's a big water break. So I kind of know there was some sort of water meter break going on. So obviously there's some issues with the way the water works here, but it's important that that stop. The city has not performed a formal review of water and sewer rates and did not adequately document the calculation of the water and sewer rate increase approved in April 2011. The board approved a 5% increase in water and sewer rates, but we did not get any documentation of how they determined whether to increase it. There's a law in Missouri, in chapter 67 of the Missouri statutes, which are very clear that fees for these types of services may only be increased if supported by a very specific statement of cost showing why we need to increase rates. So I'm not saying there didn't need to be an increase in the rates. What I'm saying is that the law was not complied with to show why there needed to be an increase in the rates. And that's very, very important that that be done. I mentioned before that the water loss went up from 25% to 49% in 2012. That's 2.5 million gallons and no one knows where it's going. We think that needs to be improved. We also found that there were inconsistent policies on payments, and some people were given better payment terms than others for their water bill. And our belief is everybody ought to be held to the same standard for payment. Talk a little bit about trash services, another one of your utilities. And the city paid about $1,800 too much for trash services than required in 2012, and about $1,500 more in 2011. Now that's not a huge amount of money, but for a small town, that's $3,000 that could have gone to improving your lives in other ways. And we think that that needs to be corrected. And the reason why there was an overpayment was that they paid for 395 residents, but the real number was between 376 and 388. So we need an accurate count of the residents and make sure there's no overpayment for the trash services. Obviously, our recommendations are that you should document and have formal reviews of water and sewer rates. So when rate increases occur, it's very clear why you need to pay more money. I think that's going to be the case going forward. The city is beginning to recalibrate now and replace city meters. There were some water leaks discovered, I understand, Mayor, is that correct? And so those can be fixed. I think there's one out there right now. And there has to be reconciliation reports to make sure people understand the water loss. That's a lot of water loss, and it does cost you. It's literally money flowing into your streets, and so that needs to stop. We recommended a formal written policy regarding payment procedures so that if somebody can't pay, we understand that sometimes people need a little help. There needs to be a delinquent payment plan, but it ought to be in writing exactly what it's going to be, and so everybody's treated equally. No one can claim, well, this person got a break and I didn't get a break, those types of things. So we think that will occur going forward. And then we want to make sure that the payments made to the trash vendor are accurate based on the actual number of people who are having their trash taken care of. And the recommendation, I understand that's already been implemented. That's correct. That's already been implemented. So we're very pleased about that. We'll talk a little bit about payroll. This is not a major finding, but we try to be meticulous in our audits. The city personnel policy says that city personnel are paid overtime for more than 40 hours a week or 8 hours a day. Some people are considered salaried and are not paid that amount. There's a question about whether that complies with something called the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act. We want to make sure that all that's done in compliance. It actually looks like some people may be entitled to more compensation than they got, not less compensation, based on our audit. There were board minutes in September 2011 that indicated new city clerk and collector were not allowed compensatory time, but then in November 2011, they were actually paid for overtime during that period, about $2,000. So again, inconsistent application of policies, and we'd like to see that made consistent and in compliance with federal law. There was also a problem with time cards. Employees were not signing time cards, and we did not find adequate supervisory review of the time cards. We found errors we only looked at 7 time cards, and 5 of them had mistakes on them. So when you're accounting for your time, it needs to be done very meticulously. I do that in my own office. I check my staff's time very meticulously, make sure they really were working on those days and it was done accurately, and that needs to be done too. The board is going to consult with its legal counsel on these issues, make sure they're in compliance with the law. They're going to make sure that the time cards are signed. I think that's actually been done too. That recommendation's already been implemented. Let's talk a little bit about finding number 6 in your audit. That's property tax controls and procedures. We found that the city collector does not prepare and submit monthly and annual reports to the board of the amount of taxes collected and annual lists of delinquent taxes, including a detailed list of persons who have not paid. That's required by 3 different Missouri laws that be done, and it was not being done. I understand, for example, in January of last year, the collector reported unpaid taxes on 33 properties totaling almost $2,000, but there was no detailed list as required by law. So I think the job is being done. It's the documentation that needs to occur. Again, these are not huge problems, but we want to make sure everything's done by the book. Property tax books, there were some problems with verifying the accuracy of property tax books and charging the city collector with the amounts to be collected. That's also required by state law. Property tax rates, there's a finding in the audit about property tax rates. There should have been a notice of public hearing for the city's proposed property tax levy, and we were not able to find that documentation. Our recommendation relative to these issues is require the city collector prepare a detailed monthly and annual reports as required by state law. The board should examine those reports for propriety and accuracy. And I understand that's being done now. Is that correct? So that's good. Again, we're not here to embarrass anybody. We just want to see the problem corrected, and we're very pleased that that problem has already been corrected. Require the city clerk to verify accuracy of property tax book and charge the amount that's supposed to be charged to the city collector. And that's all being done now. And also to hold public hearings when they're required to do so. And I understand that there already was a public hearing held on the 2012 property tax levy. So again, that problem has been fixed, and you should be happy about that. Let's talk a little bit about budgeting. Budgets are very, very important. State law actually has legal requirements for budgets for every municipality, no matter how big and how small. There has to be something called a budget message, which states the overall purpose and intent of the budget. There have to be actual and budgeted amounts for each year, how much the city is going to spend, what they expect to spend. In this particular case, a lot of that information was missing. That's also required by Part 67 of state law. The budget material that we received was deficient in several areas of what's required by state law. Because you're entitled to see what your budget is, and there's supposed to be a regular comparison of the money that's coming in with what was budgeted, and there's supposed to be budget amendments made if there's, for example, a delinquency or there's less money coming in than was originally expected. So, for example, in the year ended June 30, 2011, the actual disbursements exceeded the budget by $81,000. For the year ending June 30, 2012, the Park and Stormwater Fund exceeded budget amounts by $11,000 each. We believe that had the proper budgeting procedures and monthly reviews going on as required by state law, this possibly could have been avoided, or at least people would have known about it early enough that maybe something could have been done to prevent it. So that's what our situation, that's what our concern is. And there were some issues with the way the board documented all this too, which you can read about in more detail in the audit. The city also didn't timely publish financial statements. Section 79 of the Missouri statutes requires that financial statements be published in a particular time period, and that did not occur. So our recommendations are prepare annual budgets to contain all the information required by state law. The city plans to amend the 2012-2013 budget to comply with that. That's my understanding. That may have already been done. It's already been done. Review the budget to actuals on a monthly basis is what's required, and that's going to be done now. And that will make sure we don't find situations like an $81,000 shortfall down the road. And they're also going to publish the financial statements as required by state law. Let's talk a little bit about meetings. Open meetings. We found that some minutes were not prepared for some of the open meetings. That's required by Section 610 of the Missouri statutes. And the meeting minutes do not always contain some of the information required by state law. And look, I know it's a small town with a lot of busy people, and sometimes there's a lot of laws you have to comply with. But in this case, the purpose of the open meeting law is to make sure you all have access to accurate information about what's going on in your city. So we consider open meeting violations to be pretty important. The media is all over you when they don't get to review the minutes, and the citizens are interested in what's going on. So we want to make sure that open meetings are properly documented. You have the opportunity to review what happened if you were, for example, not able to attend the meeting. Also, there are closed meetings. There are some meetings that are not by law required to be open. If there are certain subjects that are discussed, it's been recognized by legislators in Jefferson City that it's the people that run a city are entitled to have some confidential communications. That's allowed. But when you do that, they have to document very clearly why you went into closed session and make sure people understand that there wasn't an attempt to shield you all from information that you're legally entitled to. And we found that there were no meeting minutes prepared for closed meetings in 5 out of 11 closed meetings during the 2 years of our audit. So 5 out of 11, the documentation of why the meeting was closed and what was discussed was not there. And that's very important to keep that documentation. And we do think that's, none of the findings in the audit were super serious, but that was one of the more serious ones that we found. And also, there's the Missouri Sunshine Law. There were some of the things that were discussed in closed session that we found really should have been discussed in open session. And you can read about those. It had to do with the court computer system and a few other things like that, where that really should have been discussed in a public meeting, not in a private meeting. You'll read a little bit about what happened on April 19, 2012, where the mayor wanted to go into closed session. Some people objected, and there were some issues with the way that meeting was handled. But I'm again confident that that's not going to happen again. People have been very attentive to these things while we did the audit. We also found that some of the city ordinances have not been properly updated. Some were not signed and dated and documented and approved by the board as required by state law. Our recommendations relative to this are to maintain complete and accurate minutes for open meetings, and that's been implemented. Ensure the vote to close the meeting is documented in the open meeting minutes so you can read why they closed the meeting. And that when they go into closed session, you really only talk about things you're allowed to discuss in closed session. And if you're going to go back to subjects that are supposed to be available to everybody, you go back into open session to do that. And my understanding is that the board intends to comply with that. That's a summary of what we found. It's a lot of small problems. I want you to know that you have a great city. I drove through it when I came here. You've got a lot to be proud of. This is some of the best parts of my job, is to be able to attend an event with you all. I am confident, and I don't say this everywhere I go, that the city is very attentive to what we said. They're going to try to fix the problems. Many of the problems have already been fixed. We probably will take a swing by here in 90 days to do a quick follow-up to see if everything's been implemented. Issue a very short follow-up report so you can be sure that people, I also put in the follow-up requirements when I became auditor that had never been done before, because we did find in some places they'd say, yeah, we're going to fix everything, and then we leave and nothing's been fixed. I'm pretty confident that this group is committed to fixing it, but I try to treat everybody equally, so we will come back, we'll take a look, and we'll make sure, we'll report back to you in a very short report, 90 to 120 days from now, 3 to 4 months. To ensure that all these recommendations have been implemented. Now, I know there were some issues that the petitioners were interested in looking into that we didn't address in the audit. Generally, if it's not in the audit, we did not find a serious or significant problem. There are a few instances where something's outside the scope of what I'm legally allowed to look into. Sometimes people ask us to look into stuff that the auditor by law, it's not really an audit issue, it might be a political dispute or something like that. We can't get into those types of things. But if you have any questions about things that are not in the audit, I'm happy to answer, or Donna can explain why we didn't include it in the audit. But we think it was a pretty thorough audit. They spent a lot of time here. They spent 500 hours. We found a lot of little things wrong. But the bottom line is, I think things are going to be improved. I think you got a great community you should be proud of. I think it was a good idea to have this audit done, and hopefully you'll all be on firmer financial footing going forward. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.